so you're ready.
Okay, fine. Welcome, everyone. And we've got a new rep from the National Park Authority, Richard Taylor. So welcome, Richard. You haven't been to a meeting before, have you? I don't think you have.
I came to one at Holborn Bashley when Leo couldn't make it. I think that was last year.
Yeah. Do you need us to introduce ourselves, or do you know?
I think I know who everybody is, but if I make a few mistakes or if I ask in the process, I hope that'll be okay.
Okay. Welcome. And we've got apologies, as far as I know, from Gordon, Heather and Jane, and nobody else at the moment. Right, the minutes of the last meeting, which were sent out quite soon after the meeting. I doubt if you've had any queries, have you, Vicky? I haven't heard of any.
No, I haven't received any queries on them, no.
So we just accept them as a true record then? No comment, so I would have thought so. Yes? And nodded.
I put my microphone on to comment. No comment, Peter.
What sound will come up if you speak?
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah, so nobody's got any comments. Really, people should send in earlier if they had.
Sorry, can I just quickly interject? If you want to speak at all, can you use the hands up function, and then I can let Ruth know who's waiting to speak, please?
I don't think we've got to do anything on matters arising from this, have we? Vicky, there's nothing.
No, no, I haven't got any of those either.
Okay, the chairman's report then. I did write a paragraph about the recreation management strategy, but now we've got Richard Taylor. It was agreed at the last meeting of the advisory group, which is the one I'm on, that he should chair the meeting. And I think I'm right in saying you're now chair for the whole year. Richard, yes?
Yes, I believe that is the case. You're stuck.
Have someone there on a permanent basis. We have been trying to persuade Nigel to do it all the time, but obviously it is easier for somebody else to take it on, and it's appropriate that you're doing it as the National Park member. So I actually wrote quite a short amount there. We have got another meeting in January, but Richard, do you want to add anything to that? I think things are moving on slowly, and the strategy group have to come back to us, and we are trying to get some better communications between the two groups.
Right. I will try and give a brief update. Yes, since I've joined the group, there's been a significant emphasis on trying to make sure we get better coordination between the advisory group and the steering group, so that the advisory group is in a position to feed information into the steering group and to get feedback back. I hope that process has started. The minutes at the last meeting showed that information we got from the advisory group, a lot of it about verge parking, was taken very seriously by the steering group, and I believe the steering group met earlier this month. Minutes are not out from that yet, but will be soon. And they're aware of the fact that we're to look at cycling and I think the coastal path at our next meeting. I think the commoners were very keen to discuss cycling. There is a lot happening around cycling at the moment. So that's pretty much where things are. That's where I stand. That's what I would like to get the two groups doing. And I'm very happy for anybody to approach me or to approach the officers to ask for questions to be addressed. I think it's incredibly important that we talk around these things to try and find out what the problems are and see if we've got some common ground and a way forward. So if anybody wants to fire some questions at me, please do so. I may not answer them, but I'll give it my best shot.
And I think we, as an access forum, should be involved in the cycling in particular and the coast path.
I think you're completely right.
Might get us to help on some of those, but we haven't been asked yet. sure we are, Richard, now you're in the chair.
Do please come fully loaded in January to give as hard a time as you possibly can, because if we don't ask the awkward questions, we won't find the right answers.
No.
So I'm sure you're aware, it was mentioned at the consultative panel the other day that there is a process being involved in terms of how to manage cycling within the forest at the moment, which Forestry England are heavily involved with. I think I probably just dumped Gary in it there. And what we're hoping for is that we will have a good summary version of that in January. There's also a meeting of the cycle working group before that, so hopefully we can get some feedback out of that. They're stuck as chairman as well.
Are you on the cycling working group?
I chair that one as well. I should say, so everybody's aware, I am a very keen cyclist.
I did know that. I remember you talking about a route from Minstead to Lindhurst, wasn't it?
Absolutely. There was some real kite flying going on there. That got kicked into touch on the grounds of cost alone, but it's raised the problem. I believe the cycle should be used as an alternative to the car. That's what I want.
Mark was the first one wanting to speak.
Yeah, Richard, I just wanted to know when the cycle working group meeting is, because I've got the RMS steering group meeting for the 21st of Jan, but I've not had an invite for the cycle working group.
Right. The slight pause here is I'm just checking my calendar so I don't say anything too daft. Where are we? Cycle working group is actually on the 21st of December. I'll get Ainsley to send you an invitation if that's okay, Mark.
Yes, thank you.
Will do.
Right. Thanks. We will definitely be coming back to cycling big time. The other thing
Sorry, Ruth, Peter's got a question as well. Peter Scott.
So, yes, I think it's probably irrelevant, but because Mark has spoken, just wanted to be sure that Richard was aware of the Waterside Cycling Action Group.
The Waterside Action Group are actually going to attend the next cycle working group meeting.
Good.
I can't remember the guy's name who's coming, but they are definitely on the list to attend. And we also have a group from Christchurch and Poole who are coming to join us for the first time. Again, we're very keen that we include everybody we possibly can. I'm well aware of the issues that the Waterside Cycling Group are concerned about. I share your concern.
Right.
Thank you.
So we're going to hear lots more about that, I'm sure.
Ruth, one more question from Paul.
Yes, Richard. It's just off the top of my head, really. The companies that hire out bicycles as well, are they going to be involved?
We try to get as many of those involved as we can. We have had 3 cycle shop and hire companies coming to working group meetings. The chap from Brockenhurst is very good at turning up and giving us information. He's an excellent chap. We've also had an outfit from down in Bewley who have turned up. They will all get invited. We're very keen to involve them. I think they're an absolute key entry point for giving people information about what you can do in cycling terms. So yes, hopefully so. If you know of anybody who would like to join, again, do get in touch with me or Ainsley Clinton at the National Park.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Henry.
Thank you. Richard, I just wanted to ask, as an aside really, whether or not you were aware of Friends of the Earth, the New Forest Zero Carbon Alliance and other green related groups who are very interested in cycling. Are you?
Again, we are aware of that, and actually we had a member of the Zero Carbon Alliance New Forest group come to our last 2 cycle working group meetings.
Right, okay.
So we're keen to try and join up with that. We need joined up thinking to get, well, joined up cycle groups, to be quite blunt.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fran is muted.
Sorry, I was reading an email out. I was going to say to you at the same time, and then I couldn't find my mute button. Sorry, Ruth. Yes, I don't know whether Graham Wright from Hampshire is involved in the New Forest, actual forest cycling project or whatever is going on. He's very much involved in the walking and cycling project across Hampshire. There is I can't remember the name of it, but it's, you know, it stems from the National Cycling Project. Sorry, I haven't got anybody. Can you hear me, everybody?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
So.
And he's a very good. He's one of Hampshire's officers, and he's actually working on that. So he might be somebody to at least tap into and find out what he's doing as regards the district around the forest, if he's not already involved in your work as it is.
I will certainly check up on that. We are talking, there's a lady from Hampshire County Council called Annie Tomlinson, who comes along to cycle working group meetings sometimes and to other meetings. She's very much involved in traffic planning and traffic management. One thing I should say is that there is currently a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan being developed. It has a lovely acronym. It's called an LC-WIP. That is being jointly developed by the Park Authority, Hampshire County Council, NFDC and Forestry England. This is a very important document. It takes 12 months to put together, and it helps if you're looking to bid for finance and government funding if you have one of these things in place. So hopefully Hampshire County Council will be heavily involved in the production of that plan. I think they actually, their sort of, what do we call it, independent arm actually helps produce these plans. So I will check up with that. This is Graham Wright, it was, from Hampshire County Council, he said. Yeah? Okay, I will check up to make sure he's involved. Yeah?
Thank you. We may want to put cycling on the next meeting. Now, I've lost all the pictures. It's just gone to the agenda. Is this something Vicky's...
No, Peter, you're actually sharing your screen. And so you need to click on the button next to the leave icon, and it says share content, and you need to stop sharing your screen, please.
Because I don't know who wants to speak. I don't know. I'm not sure whether Fran wanted to come back or no.
I was just going to say, Ruth, that project that it was the LC project that gentleman Richard was speaking about. I was talking about.
Right. Well, we still haven't got the right thing up on the screen. The other thing I had written about was this parking outside the national park boundary. Now, two things came to me since our last meeting, and I'm concerned if we are losing the parking, which we seem to be in the Avon Valley, where people are using it for recreation. People here are just going to go into the forest, and I thought it was putting a great deal more pressure on the forest. Difficult to sort, but I thought we should be aware of that. And what I wanted to know was whether on the other fringes of the forest the same thing was happening. Is car parking opportunity disappearing? Does anybody know? Well, Peter needs to sort it out, or we're not. Sam.
And we've got Sam and Peter both to speak.
That's it, Sam.
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to find this button that you're talking about, Vicky, to switch the agenda off.
Okay, so it's next to the leave button, which is on the right hand side of the screen. There's a little button that says share content. You need to turn your screen sharing off from there.
That's the trouble. I haven't got this leave button on the right hand side of the screen.
Peter, if I can sort of butt in, and I do apologise, it's a little square box with an arrow pointing up the way. It is right next to the leave button.
No, I'm not getting that. Anyway, carry on.
You might not be on the right screen. You might have to just click through your tabs to get back onto the meeting screen. I think you're looking at one of the papers that was sent out to you.
Yeah, well, no, I've got that on another screen, but this is anyway. Don't I'll switch myself off.
You
Okay.
could switch your video off, couldn't you?
It might help if you leave and come back into the meeting, Peter.
Okay, well, has anybody got any information about other parking problems on the periphery of the national park? There's nobody here. There's a great deal about the waterside, or
No.
right.
Sam has got his hand up. Chairman.
Sam wanted to. Let's hear from Sam.
I was just going to say, Ruth, there may be a few local changes, but I've not heard anything significant from any of the partners, whether it's NFDC, HGC, or anything else. It might be a few isolated instances, but yeah.
It's just around me. It is a major problem now. I think everybody is going to be descending on the forest, and as you well know, there's lots of walkers and cyclists out and about. Okay, well, we are concerned, obviously, about the forest. Okay, so we will move on. We haven't got anybody else wanting to speak.
Oh,
now.
sorry, Chairman. We've got Richard Taylor as well.
Oh, right. I haven't got any of that coming up now.
Sorry. I think Peter. Oh, that's better. Yeah.
I'll just say very, very briefly, we have got a round of quadrant meetings coming up in January. If you wanted to get in touch with Debbie Coping and ask for that to be added as a question, it would be a way of asking all the parishes if they see anything around the going on around the park.
I was very concerned about it, and I have actually spoken to Nigel, and he is concerned because it does mean some areas are just out of reach of people. And I have also contacted Edward Heron, who may well try to do something about it, because he also lives in the area. Okay, so we'll think about the quadrant meeting then. Okay, so we move on then. We had apologies from Adam who's off doing some training today, and he has written a report. He's written about the England Coast Path. Now, we still know very little extra about that. We are waiting, and hopefully it may be open, part of it, in early 21 and the rest of the time. But I'm not holding my breath on that one. But it's good that Natural England are still out and about on that one. On accessibility, he pointed out they have updated the maps on the website for the national park, which is showing people who need easy routes for use in buggies or with walking aids. So hopefully that will work better, and it's supposed to be accessible now with smartphones. So has Henry looked at this?
Thank you, Ruth. No, I haven't actually. It's the first I've heard of it, which is, but it's very good news indeed. So I will pick that up. And which website is it available on the New Forest, the National Park?
It did come out in the agenda for this in the report.
Okay, I missed it. So there's website.
Right, and the third item. Oh, Anne, do you want to say something?
Just a quickie, Ruth, to say we must make sure that our minutes reflect our thanks, perhaps, to Adam for all the hours of work he's put in.
Oh, right. Well, we can say that, and we're sorry we missed him.
Yeah, I think it's important, but mainly so we recognise, people's hard work. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and the other thing he's given us is this. He's given us a picture of a sign for the historic routes. There is some progress going on with that, but obviously The COVID is slowing everything up. The Leap Loop will have its signage as well, but it's more difficult for people to get out and about and do the work on routes. So I don't know whether Vicky's got anything else to add. Has Adam sent any other messages?
No, that's all I've got from Adam.
We did, presumably he's actually sent in our response to the Countryside Code.
I think so, yes. He did send a response for Gordon regarding the coast path, which I think he copied you into as well.
Yes, he did. Gordon was concerned about the dog walking particular on the coast path. And he pointed out that Natural England are sort of dealing with it, really. Obviously, the path's not open, and we will hear a lot more about that, I think. I was hoping Heather might be. There's a dog walking issue at Hatchet Pond as well, I think. Anyhow, Anne?
Yeah, on historical routes, Ruth, we're mentioning the one on the waterside, but do we have an update on the one for Rockford Common and the one that runs through the Blissford Stockton, what's called Stockton Ironworks route? I don't know if Vicky can help us on this one, because I've been asked a few times.
I have actually had an email recently from Gareth, whose role on this ceases like the end of this month, I think. He is staying on doing archaeology, and there is somebody else in the National Park who will be taking over. The National Trust have requested that the Rockford Common one is in abeyance. I think they don't have many staff, right?
Ah.
The Stockton one, there is work going on with that, but they do need workers from Hampshire County Council, the rangers, to go out and do some of the gates. They've got the gates, but it's been very difficult with COVID to put it in. But they haven't forgotten about it, and I think we can blame COVID for a lot of it.
Okay. Can I come back on that, Ruth? Because I know where some of the routes are, and if they need to drive into the farm fields, which might be a bit easier for them, we ought to send the message back that, you know, if anything I can do to help facilitate putting in the gates, I'm more than happy to offer.
Well, that's Alison Perry we need to tell. Will you contact her? I can email her and tell Alison Perry.
Alison Perry's in the meeting and would like to speak.
All right, Alison. Oh, I didn't know you joined us, Alison.
Sorry, I was having a few computer issues, so that's why I was slightly late. Yes, so historic routes. Yes, as you say, Ruth, Gareth is going. He's remaining within the authority, though, as the archaeology or the archaeologist or something. I can't remember exactly his role. So we are we've come up with some kind of agreement with Gareth and Adam and Jim, whereby we will, I suppose, put in or establish those routes one at a time. So we're at the point where we've done the Tatchbury one. So most of the infrastructure is in for Tatchbury, all the clearance is done. We're just waiting on the finger posts and the signage to be delivered from Adam's contacts, which we were hoping would be done before Christmas, but it doesn't look like that's going to come through now. So when we have those, the idea is that they're going to be put in by volunteers, and that'll be our path wardens in the forest. Slight problem is that our community engagement ranger is leaving us as of Christmas time. We are recruiting, so we may have a little problem there, but it will be fine. The other routes, I hold my hand up, I don't know a great deal about the other routes. Helen knows slightly more than I do, but I know that all of the infrastructure has been purchased for the Stockton one, for example. So there are a load of gates to go in, and literally we will work through them as we have the time as an access team. At the moment, it's just very busy, so we will do them as we can.
I think there's quite a lot of games, aren't there?
On the Stockton one, I've got a feeling there's like 7 or something. The 2 that we did on Tatchbury, we did in-house. It might be that we try and get some volunteer groups, if we can, working next year sometime to do a few more of the establishment and putting in the structures and things like that. But as you know, you've referred to that volunteering has been pretty non-existent for the last 9-10 months. So a lot of the work that was to be done on those trails was to be done by volunteers as part of the project. And so we've struggled being able to, number one, get volunteers who are willing to come out, even though they could come out with us. But then you can only have groups of 6, and if you've got a ranger or a couple of rangers, you've then only got 4 volunteers with you. So, you know.
And social distancing is quite difficult with that anyhow. So it's Ria that's leaving, is it?
Yes, so she leaves at the end of the month.
Oh, yeah. That's sad, because she's been quite good news for us. We have met her at the forum. Yes.
And we are recruiting, so the advert is currently out. So we will be replacing her.
And
just to quickly come back in, I'm chairman of Hyde Parish Council, in which Stockton, Blissford and the whole route situates. Please contact the clerk, because we might be able to run you up a few volunteers, particularly the ones that are complaining all the time.
Thanks. And thanks for your note about the access onto the site. So that's good. Thank you.
So
you are more than welcome. It'll make it a lot easier, I think, particularly for one gate. You don't want to be carrying things anywhere. Okay.
Peter, you wanted to speak.
Yes, just to come back on a couple of things. I spoke to John Trustwell, and he didn't think that the Calshot to Highcliffe to Calshot section of the coast path would be finished until the end of 2021.
Yeah, well, we're getting different views all the time on this. I think we don't hold our breath, we wait and see. It might be later than that, Peter, the way things are going.
That was all to go. And the other question was, somebody asked me, these historic routes, have any of them actually made it onto the definitive map yet?
They are, a lot of them are on definitive paths. They're not down as historic routes, but they're on definitive paths.
That's on the definitive map?
It doesn't call it a historic route, but you can walk it. But wait, there will be information boards and other things. Alison, I'm sure, would like to say a bit more.
Yeah, so all of the historic routes themselves are on definitive rights of way, and where they're or across the forest, wherever that's appropriate. There are some sections that go along roads and bits and pieces like that to connect them. The idea of the historic routes themselves was that they're basically just inviting people onto rights of way that already exist and creating like circular, interesting trails. So they won't be on the definitive map. They may go on the Ordnance Survey maps. Sorry, can you, my washing machine, I'm just going to go and close my door because my washing machine's very loud. But yeah, so they may go on the Ordnance Survey maps as a circular route. In regards to the coast path, Peter is correct that Highcliffe to Calshot section won't be done by the end of next year for definite. I think, well, as we know, Natural England have got to reconsult on that, and they're not in a place at the moment to do that at the moment. I have been out with an inspector on some of the other sections, the Calshot to Gosport sections and the Gosport to Portsmouth section. So there are inspectors out and about at the moment. So it's just when an inspector gets assigned to that that first section, Calshot to Gosport 1, which is the bit that Adam is concerned about, the bit that falls into the park of that section. So we're just waiting literally for the inspector to come out and have a look on that one. And we just have to wait until they're ready.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's some progress, albeit slow, but it's to be expected. It's slow at this time. Right, so we move on to the additional reports then.
Sorry, just before you go, Ruth, can I just ask Alison, who are these inspectors? Who do they work for?
The Secretary of State.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It's the national inspection because there's an inquiry.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you.
So there will have been objections to the route that was put forward. And if those objections can't be removed, it automatically gets referred to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State has to approve everything anyway. And so the Secretary of State appoints inspectors to make a decision as to whether the route that Natural England has put forward is a suitable, appropriate, what have you.
And that can be a long, drawn-out process because we're still waiting for the last one, aren't we, in Dorset? So, okay, the next section then is additional reports. Oh, Alison, did you want to say something else on that one or no? Your hand is still up on my screen. No. Additional reports then. I mean, there are no reports from Wiltshire or Dorset access forums, and I do not have a report from the Hampshire one either. I don't know whether anybody attended the last one. So I had jotted down that there might be something to say about cycling, but we've covered that already, and there might have been something to say about dogs, but as we haven't got Heather here, I don't think there is anything else. So are there any other items to report? Richard? Or Ros one? No, all right, it came up, hand came up, but it's Ros who wants to say something. No?
Sorry, I thought you were moving on to any other business. So no, wait, I was a little early.
Well, okay, we haven't got any other reports from anyone, have we? It seems. Henry, you have? A report from something?
You're on mute, Henry.
Beg your pardon. Thank you very much. I did see when Peter was sharing his screen, there was a report on the bridges along the which I assume they're the ones along the disused railway line at Longslade.
Henry, that is on Gary's report.
Oh right, okay, that's fine.
Gary and Sam, so it's not
okay.
Time
no,
to
just didn't want to miss it, as it is an issue that I'm.
It's on the agenda. It is on the agenda. So then there's no other public representations, and the AOB, I don't quite know. Ros wants to say something here. Ros?
Yes, sorry about that earlier bit. This is something which, when we talk about a lot of pressure on the forest, seems to be nicely sidestepped. It's actually human feces. One of the pressures that so clearly showed when we're post-lockdown was the lack of toilets. As that moved on and the toilets opened, the situation improved, but is still a real issue, something which I very rarely saw before, and now I see regularly. And I actually think it's something of a public health issue, but I have not seen it raised at all.
Oh, I have seen it in the newspapers, and the issue of toilets has been raised by us over many years, in fact, and we did try to sort it, but we did get some slight improvements, but they've all gone by the board because those have disappeared. And now Anne can remember all of that. And I don't know how you do, because there are the toilets on the forest are all closed, and Sam may come on to that or may wish to comment. They're just not there, and otherwise people have to have permission to use pubs or cafes. They're all on the periphery. They're nowhere near the forest, and of course masses of people are using the forest. I don't know what we do. Richard, has the National Park Authority discussed it?
Thanks, Richard. We have been having the quadrant leads meeting every couple of weeks to try and discuss what's been going on around the park, and this issue has been raised, particularly by Sway and Brockenhurst. I know that Nigel Matthews has talked to the Forestry Commission about it, and the last I heard was that some special contractors had been appointed to go around and try and clear particular problem areas. It may well be that Forestry England will know more about this than me, but it's just to say that I know the issue has been flagged up and has been raised, probably when things were at their worst, after the end of the first lockdown, when we had the huge surge of people into the forest. That was when the issue appeared to be at its worst. That's all I can add to it on this.
Okay, thanks. So Anne's had her hand up for some time. Anne, do you want to say anything? No. Henry, then. Henry?
Don't think I have my hand up.
Oh, it's shown on my screen. Sorry, I don't know who has, and perhaps nobody. I think Sam might be the most appropriate person to.
I've got my hand up.
Well, let's hear what Sam says. He might ask any queries you've got.
Sorry, is that me or Peter now?
Do you have any comments, Sam, on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead to the slot you've put in for us, really, but and Gary's got his hand up as well, so Gary will probably be able to offer some more detail. Yeah, I would just say, sorry, I would just say, you know, toilets along with all the other infrastructure, you know, we need to take a view on all of it, and we need to get the right mechanism, the right platform to inform what we need and where to put people in the right place and give them the right offer, and we can talk a little bit about that in a bit. But yeah, specifically with toilets, I think I've seen a number of key issues flagged this summer. Obviously, human waste has been a key one. I think along with other ones, it's important that we learn from that, but equally we recognise this summer was an exceptional period of time. We're dealing with a lot of unprecedented changes and pressures, and it's important that our response is proportional and informed, not necessarily specifically to what we saw there. But we can talk about that in a little bit.
We can talk about that at greater length in the the recreation access update, item 8 on our agenda. So Peter, are you talking about the forest? Because we'll leave it till item 8.
No, it's just a very quick one about for any other business. We were warned, we the Ramblers were warned several months ago that British Rail were trying to close public rights of way where they cross the railway. And I've come across the first one in the forest, which is Marsh Lane in Lymington, which is sort of halfway between Lymington and the hospital. And there's a footpath runs along through the woods there and then crosses the railway line. And Network Rail are looking at closing that crossing. That's it. Thank you.
I think it may be that Alison can fill us in on that, because they would need to consult on it.
So yeah,
they are consulting.
They haven't. Hi, sorry, it's me. We have discussed that one with Network Rail, and I've been on site to have a look at the options there because it's an at-grade crossing. Their health and safety team kind of flag it as a massively high risk. Their plan is to divert the path to continue down along the railway to the road at the bottom, you know, where the road, the actual level crossing is for the cars. You would pop out alongside there. We haven't received a formal application yet, but that is probably likely to come in the next couple of months. And as Peter's referred to, I think they've been talking to local ramblers and the Open Spaces Society, etc., around and about that one. But yes, so that is definitely in the offing.
Right.
Okay. Sorry, just to finish on that, because I've had a look at the section between Ashurst and Brockenhurst, and there are 15 crossings across there. So we need to keep an eye on them, you know, to make sure that British Rail don't. They're all bridges as well, which are expensive to maintain. So they'll have those closed, give them half a chance.
They're not closed bridges yet, though, I don't think.
No.
Right, Fran's got comment.
Thank you. Yes, I thought while you're talking about bridges, I don't know whether you're aware, the county council has all had notification that the bridge at Holmesley, you know, near the tea rooms, that is due. It's been due for a while to be done, but it's actually scheduled in for June next year to be finished by August. But of course, that's flexible. So just so that you know, there may be some diversions and things going on around that area.
Right, I'm sure that'll be in the newspaper. Thank you. So, Ros, you started off with this. I've still got your hand up on my screen, Ros, but I don't know whether you...
No, I haven't put it up again, so...
It's just remained. Okay, fine. So I think that's probably the end of that, because we've got time for questions at the end anyhow. Now, the next item was David Ilsley. We're probably just a few minutes early. Is he around, Vicky, or?
Yeah, Ruth.
It's lovely to see you anyhow. It's a while since we've had our meeting, and I'm sure you'll be able to fill us in. If you'd listened to earlier, we're quite interested in Fawley still.
Yeah. So I've been on your meeting since it started, and obviously I've had the pleasure of joining the Access Forum meetings a few times in the past. So yeah, I think I was asked following a conversation with Adam just to give you a brief update on number one, the planning white paper. And Richard and Anne might glaze over as I talk through this because they've heard this a few times at the Quadrant meetings, and then a very brief update for the sort of second 5 or 10 minutes on the Fawley planning application. I'm not very competent on computers, so Vicky is going to helpfully move along the slides. I'll promise you I'm not going to read everything on the slides out because you can all read, but they're just there, so there's a bit of background if you don't want to listen to me for 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'm very happy via Ruth to take any questions that people might have. So yeah, number one, talking about the planning for the future. So this was the government's planning white paper that they published in August this year. That's the front cover. Here we have the forward by the Prime Minister, and I won't read out his quote, but he's quite disparaging about our planning system and the lack of housing it's delivering. I've worked in planning for 20 years now, but people who've worked in it much longer than me will say it's in the past we've kind of tinkered with the system and we've it's evolved and moved on. This is, as the quote says, this is the Prime Minister saying we need to tear it down and start all over again with an entirely new planning system, which is anybody who's ever read the white paper will see is almost solely about housing delivery. So thanks, Vicky. Main ones there, the government set out the main proposals that they're trying to do in this reform to the planning system. and I've heard a few of these in the past in previous reforms, so they're trying to streamline it. The second bullet point down talks about a kind of digital first approach, which is, as anybody who's engaged in any government things in the last couple of years will see, they're quite, or they claim to be quite data driven and quite algorithm driven, and they see the planning system as being the same as that. They do talk about design and sustainability. They've had quite a few reports done about the design of new development being one of the reasons why the general public are quite anti-development, because they feel with some justification it's quite boxy and it is quite identikit and it's not reflecting local distinctiveness. But the final bullet point down there, the fifth one, talking about land for development is the primary aim of these reforms. Thanks, Vicky. So I won't go through this in too much detail. I hope you can pretty much read it. And I think maybe after the presentation, maybe with the minutes, I can circulate this. But my area of work, so I work and manage the National Park Authority's planning policy team. So our main bit of work is working on our local plan. That's quite a painful process at times. And the white paper is basically saying it's taking planning authorities 7 years to produce these local plans. They have to produce so much evidence, there's so much consultation and examination that it's a bit like painting the fourth rail bridge, that by the time you've finished, you start again, and they're out of date before they're even adopted. So the main headlines in the planning white paper, and some of you may have seen this in the press, is number one, this proposal one is this, what's been paraphrased as zoning, where the government in the white paper say we want the entire country of England, the white paper only applies in England, but we want England to be sort of zoned as either protect, growth or renewal. And they don't actually say which ones national parks would be in. The examples they give for protect are their usual one of green belt, AONBs that also get a mention. We've sort of queried where national parks fit in with this. Logically, they would naturally fit, you would have thought, under protect, but there is also recognition that our national parks are home to over 300,000 people. They do need to evolve, they do need to grow, they do need small scale, appropriate development to meet local needs. And I think a kind of a green wash of protect, where everything's preserved in aspic and nothing happens, wouldn't be very good either. So yeah, proposal 2, again, so number 1, we're going to zone the country. Number 2, the government have said, well, where we put land in a protect zone, rather than having your local plan policies, you're going to judge your planning applications against national policy that we the government will be establishing. So people like Anne and Richard, who sit on our planning committee and currently refer to our own local plan, if this came to fruition in the future, they would be looking at the government's NPPF, so the National Planning Policy Framework, and to determine planning applications. And I think every national park authority has said, well, how we have the detail and the nuance to allow that to happen. You know, we have policies on, say, commoners' dwellings. Northumberland have them about dark night skies. The Broads Authority has it about moorings and things, and it's unclear how any form of national policy could replicate that local detail. Final couple of bits there are the idea that local plans would be much shorter in length. It may not feel it, but the New Forest National Park one at 120 odd pages is quite slimline compared to some, and the government wants to reduce them. And the final bullet point that's picking up, that's an interesting one, is they feel the current process where planning authorities allocate a site in a local plan, have a debate about it, gets in the plan, then a planning application has to come in and all the same can of worms gets opened. The government feel that's a complete duplication, and actually if something's in a plan, effectively planning permission should be granted for it. Thanks, Vicky. So I won't go through this one at length. The government wants to speed up planning, so contrasting the 7 years at a moment it takes to prepare a local plan, they think you should be able to do that in 2.5 years. So one way of concertinaing up that process is to, my reading or the National Park Authority's reading of it, is to reduce the level of consultation on it. So our own local plan, I think, had 4 or 5 periods of public consultation. It had a 14-month examination. The government are suggesting that local plans should have a single 6-week period of consultation, and then the pressure will be on the planning inspectorate to turn their report around in 9 months. Even our own one took 14 months for an area with not a huge amount of development happening. So that's one way they try and speed it up. And I'm going to try and finish on a more positive note, but the final couple of bullet points pick up on the government's sorts of view about engagement in planning applications. So they're trying to push engagement to the plan making stage and sort of arguably have less at the planning application stage. And their view of people's engagement in planning applications is that it's a small minority of voices who are having a disproportionately large say, which I think is maybe quite a sad reflection on how they view the planning system. But there we go. Thanks, Vicky.
David, do you want to take questions as they come or at the end?
I'll pause on the white paper bit, if that's okay. I've only got, I think, a couple more on the white paper, and then I'll let everybody catch their breath, and then I'll pick up on the Forley proposals. I know Paul's got his hand up, so maybe if I get through the last couple on the white paper and then pick up Paul and any other questions on that, if that's okay. I'll assume it's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'll come to you first. So yeah, in terms of I've given an overview of plan making that I work in terms of what the government call development management, or sometimes known as development control. Again, there's this idea that the consenting of a planning application should be quicker, where things are in line with local plans. This feeling that we're just double handling everything at the moment, that we work for years on the local plan and then the planning application comes in and all the same issues get debated then. I do think they want to streamline that quite a bit. The second bullet point down, if anybody can tell me exactly what a digitally enabled end-to-end process is, I'd be very happy to find that out. I think we view it as almost sort of machine readable plans, where you submit your planning application, you fill in various statutory fields, and it almost goes through a flowchart and churns out consent or refuse, and it removes the human judgment and the human knowledge and discretion from the process. So we've sort of asked for some clarification on that. Again, the third bullet point down is picking on the increasingly complex variety of routes through which people can get permission. So in the past, you submitted a planning application, you waited eight weeks, you got your answer, you got a letter from your planning authority. Now you have vastly extended permitted development rights. So a lot of the things we get grief about at the National Park Authority don't need planning permission, even in a national park, and the government are keen to extend permitted development rights. So yeah, I think that has pros and cons. And thanks, Vicky. So I'm conscious I'm talking to the Access Forum. So rather than just churning out my usual presentation on the white paper, I have reviewed the white paper to see how much it talks about access to the countryside and various other things. And you may not be surprised to hear that it doesn't feature prominently. And I personally could find one reference to it in the entire white paper, which is, I think, distilling the planning system down into a housing delivery system, quite sadly. So there is one reference in there in proposal 15 that you can all read, that talks about opportunities to improve public access, but it's very much about housing delivery, almost at the expense of every other issue that the planning system is here to deliver and protect and safeguard and enhance, which is, I think, quite blinkered. So yeah, thanks, Vicky. So in terms of the National Park Authority's response, Richard, Anne and other colleagues sat down at our full authority meeting on the 15th of October. We discussed the planning white paper. A number of you will be aware that the National Park Authority's new chairman, Gavin Parker, has an academic background in planning, so he's a professor at a university lecturing in planning. So that keeps me and my colleagues on our toes, having a chairman who knows more about your job than you do. But we did look through the planning white paper. We agreed a response that was submitted at the end of October. I won't read all of those out for you. It's what we've talked about. it's picking up what is the status of national parks. How should these reforms pick up on the Glover review recommendations that have sat on the shelf now for 15 months? You know, this is a chance to actually enact those recommendations, and some of the white papers almost doing the exact opposite. It's extending permitted development rights. Glover said you should be removing them in national parks. I think there's a debate about how it fits with other acts and bills that are coming through Parliament. I think our members were rightly quite concerned about the kind of really blunt tool of the zoning approach of say, well, here's protect, you can't do anything, here's growth, you can do whatever you want, and here's renewal, and it's something in between. And certainly at the quadrant meetings when we discussed this, there was quite a lot of concern about the perception that there was a reduction in public engagement in planning, that actually people would be restricted on what they could some things wouldn't need planning permission. The local plan would be only a narrow window to come on, and I think members were right to raise concerns about that. So we submitted those comments, and National Parks England also did a response on behalf of the 10 English national parks. So we're sort of awaiting the government's response to this. I think they got, reading sort of between the lines, they got a lot of opposition to this, including from their own MPs. I don't think it went down too well in the shire counties of the southeast of England. So that's sort of a whistle-stop tour of the white paper. I will stop rambling in a second. The notes I've got here, very happy for them to be circulated. They have no formal status. They're just out of the top of my head. So that's sort of an overview of these quite radical reforms, how we think they could impact on the national park, and how we've responded to challenge some of them so far. But I'll stop now and fire Ruth if she's on the call, and if not, somebody wants to step in.
Well, I don't know. Hi.
Hi.
I'm not sure whether.
I can hear you, Ruth.
Ruth, you're in.
Right, I can't see everybody's hands or anything like that, and mine kept fading out, but I've got you, and I have heard quite a lot of it, yes, especially the end part. They kept telling me to rejoin Teams and cutting me out. Anyhow, I think we were all aware that we're not getting much say in any of this planning. Now, has anybody got any comments, questions for David?
Yes, I do. Yes, and
Right.
I mean, I haven't said, I can't see anything on there in regarding to Greenbelt land and why their building companies are allowed to apply for building on Greenbelt land, which under forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought Greenbelt land was to stop urban sprawls, and the concern is over the next 50 to 100 years whether New Forest would just become a suburban park because companies been allowed to build on Greenbelt land. And I don't see anything in the green paper, now I could be wrong, that about protecting these areas of Greenbelt land for our wildlife, our habitats and so on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. Sorry, did you finish? I didn't mean to.
Yeah. No,
okay, yeah, I can try and give a brief response to that. So yeah, in terms of officially designated green belts, the only green belt in the whole of Hampshire is a little bit in New Forest District, which is part of the Bournemouth green belt, and a bit up in sort of Hart and Rushmore, which is part of the London green belt. So the rest of Hampshire's never officially, like York or Cambridge or Oxford, had a green belt designated around any of its settlements. But what obviously lots of members of the public would say is, well, okay, it may not be green belt, but it's greenfield development, and we're not happy about greenfield development. There's a lot proposed around the national park in New Forest District. I think what the white paper says in terms of the official designation of green belt, it's politically very difficult for the government because the public recognise green belt and value it, but it is massively constraining development opportunities. So the government say, well, we support the green belt, we want it retained, but it's for local planning authorities to define its precise boundaries. So what New Forest District Council have done is through their local plan, they've had to make some very difficult decisions about how they meet their housing need, and they have, through their local plan process, released some bits of greenbelt land for development. there is brownfield land that can meet some of our housing needs, but it can't meet all of the government target of 300,000 houses a year can't all be met on brownfield sites like the Lyndhurst Park Hotel or Ashurst Hospital or the Fawley Power Station site. Some of it, to meet the government's housing needs, has to be on greenfield sites. So yeah, the planning white paper arguably tries to sort of do a bit of a balancing act of saying we think it's important, it should be protected, but on the other hand, you need to meet these housing needs. And it's up to you, the local planning authority, to determine where it is.
Yeah, I think, David, I still will have really concerns because this is just a start. But once we start eating into greenbelt land, that's it. It just opens the door. Well, you've done it for there. Why can't we do it for there, and so on? And that's a real concern for me. Anyway, that's me.
No, thanks for that, Paul. I
no
do
worries.
understand the concerns. Yeah.
So, David, is there anything you think we should do as an access forum?
I mean, I think in terms of the planning white paper consultation, it closed at the end of October. So the National Park Authority did submit the response that's on the screen in front of you summarised. National Parks England did submit quite a detailed response. I don't think there's a sort of a window open now to submit further comments, but I'm very happy as and when the government's response to the white paper comes out to give you an update or anything like that. But I think that the window for commenting isn't currently open.
Yeah, I think we did have a chance to say something to Adam, but obviously it's something we'll sit back and wait because it may well affect us rather more later on.
Yeah. I don't know, Ruth, if you can see people's hands or if you want me to read a name out.
I was getting a message. No, you do it, David, if you can see hands.
Okay, I think Fran may have, apologies if Rosemary had hers up, but we'll go Fran and then Rosemary, if that's okay.
Hello there, thank you for that presentation. I guess I was just going to say about the current local plan is to Paul. I'm afraid, most of it is actually in my area, unfortunately. My district area is Hordle and Milford. My county area is Milford, and of course small pieces of greenbelt have been allowed to be included in the local plan. I don't like it, but I mean it was a whole council decision that this was going to go ahead, and it was what was required at the time from government, and of course that was before this white paper has now come forward, and whatever that will bring as well. So there are already pockets. You'll see these 100 house plus sites popping up in Lymington near Oakhaven. You've heard that one in the news. Hordle is on. I know that the developers are about to put in applications for that, and Brock Hills, which sort of borders Tiptoe, North New Milton, places all around there. I want to say that Hampshire and the NFDC have both put in comments through Edward, through their council comments, but Edward is responsible for planning at the district. And I know we put in fairly strong responses to the white paper. But in the end, these are things that come down from above, and it is very difficult, and housing is needed. And last of all, also something else that I don't know how that will affect how it will affect the park, because it's slightly different, but we were really worried. I'm very worried about these permitted development rights that are now coming out. It looks like in towns around the park, New Milton and all that, it looks like if it all goes ahead and it isn't stopped in some way, we'll have just whole layers of flats put on top of existing layers of flats. They're going to allow people to build a whole extra tier of flats on top of a 2-story block. That's very simplified. We had a presentation, but actually it's quite important. So anyway, that's my input there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think on that, Fran, I'd echo that. I mean, the permitted development rights are subtly different inside a protected landscape than outside, but there are still permitted development rights in national parks. People who sit on our planning committee will know that we have endless debates about, well, I don't like the design of that. Well, it's well, okay, if I shave 1/3 of a metre off it, I can do it under PD, and you don't get any say. And it's used as a sort of fallback negotiating tool on nearly every planning application we get. You're exactly right. Outside national parks, I think it was when Sajid Javid was Chancellor, he talked about vertical extensions and airspace above properties, so blocks of flats being able to go up without needing planning permission. I mean, it's a big issue, and it's something that does incrementally impact on the character of areas, and our hands are quite tied on what we can do about that. So we've certainly, I think it's the top bullet point there, we've quite strongly emphasised that the Glover review on landscape said in national parks you should be removing permitted development rights, and the white paper is actually proposing to extend them. So it's completely at odds with the Glover report. So we have pushed on that. Yeah, and certainly the greenbelt point, I think Paul mentioned it in his question. Greenbelts are there to primarily prevent coalescence of settlements. So the government do say it is up for local planning authorities to decide how you define those precise inner and outer boundaries of greenbelts, which is why, as you say, Fran, the district local plan is looking at small scale bits of greenbelt removal that have been supported by the government, because rightly or wrongly the decision was made that they're not preventing settlements coalescing. You know, the lower Pennington Lane one in Pennington has issues with it, but developing it is not stopping two cities from coalescing. It's almost a sort of a little bit of outer greenbelt. So yeah, I'd agree with your points. Could have just said yes, couldn't I? Rosemary? I can't hear if you're saying anything, Rosemary, sorry. I'll give you another chance.
Okay,
Sorry.
Yeah, got it. Sorry about
can
that.
hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah, mine really is about the protecting the special character of the area. I know that recently an inspector has criticised the national park about failing really almost to apply its guidelines. And the areas I'm sort of thinking of, just to give you one example for the meeting, is the use of close boarded fencing, where previously there was hedging, which of course is much more environmentally friendly. It's a major issue. And again, just to give you one example, there was a photo produced of Sway Road in Brockenhurst just 10 years ago, and then a photo taken recently, and it has completely changed what looked like a very rural setting with a rural path beside it, pleasant to walk along, is now actually just somewhere in suburbia. I wonder if there's anything actually in the plan which is going to protect that.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. I know that road quite well, and I'd probably agree with you. And there are other ones. I know Sway Parish Council themselves would pick up bits sort of 2 miles down the road in Sway. In terms of those kind of local distinctiveness, character changes, sort of two answers to that is, number one, as we've just discussed, these permitted development rights really are impacting on our ability to tackle these things. So if you build a fence that's below a certain height, you don't need planning permission, so you can rip a hedge out and put a fence in. Planning authority can't do anything about it. Likewise, if you don't build it adjacent to the highway, so there's a debate, and I won't get into the technicalities, but homeowners and developers are very clever at moving a fence back 0.5 metre and then building a 2 metre high fence. Close boarded fencing doesn't need permission because it's technically not adjacent to the highway. What I would say to try and be more positive is, as well as our own National Park local plan, we're in the process of reviewing our National Park Design Guide, which is a supplementary document that our planning committee use when they assess planning applications. And I think our current design guide is about 8 or 10 years old now. In reviewing that, issues like close boarded fencing are sadly more prevalent now than they were a decade ago. And we will put as much as we can into the design guide about trying to address that. But again, the frustration that there are dozens of planning agents out there whose specialism is what can be done under permitted development, and you'll see, you know, developments dropping down a bit and then doing things, and fences moved in 0.5 metre to get around the restrictions on adjacent to highway. So our hands are tied a bit. Where they're not tied, we will we will, through our design guide update, be trying to do as much as we can on that. And we get inspectors going either side on appeals. We've had a bit of a bad run at appeals where we've dug our heels in, and the inspectorate in Bristol have said, no, you're being unreasonable. It's fine. And we've actually had quite a few appeals overturned, our decisions overturned at appeal, where we have tried to dig our heels in on that. So yeah, we're frustrated, our hands are tied, and we will try and use the tools we have to address it as best we can. But you're right, it is an issue.
Can I ask, how is that being approached then to government? You know, you say currently you can't do anything because it's allowed under protected development. And, you know, if I go through the lovely footpaths in Brock, exactly the same is happening, you know, I've been here 20 years. You know, you really felt you were in a beautiful little lane, lovely places to go and walk. And now they're merely a means of getting from A to B with close boarded fencing, you know, along the way. So, you know, you wouldn't sort of say, oh, we'll go for a walk around there because there's nothing really to see in a way. Is anything being done to actively address this? Because if they're saying that a local area can try to maintain its special character, but actually something which is, you know, relatively easy to spoil the character is allowed, then is there something being done about that?
No, it's a good question. Yep. So in terms of what we're trying to do about that is, number one, through making representations on things like government consultations, we bang home that point. I think number two, I don't regularly attend our planning committee, and Richard and Anne may step in, but I think our members are quite hacked off about some of the appeal decisions we've had recently, and the government's interpretation of our policies and the government's very permissive approach to development. And my head of planning, Steve Avery, is, I think, writing to the planning inspectorate about some of these appeal decisions. And we have in the past invited the planning inspectorate down to our offices in Lymington and said, you know, you need to be taking a different approach in this protected landscape. What training have your inspectors had? So we are lobbying on that front. The final thing I would say is that where there's clear evidence of damage and things, planning authorities do have the ability through something called an Article 4 direction to remove national permitted development rights. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because you have to have evidence that there's a problem, but if it's gone too far and the horse has bolted, you've lost the problem. So what we have done in a few areas of the national park is said, if you're worried about this issue, whether it's close boarded fencing or can't think of another one, single story rear extensions with lots of glass in them. If the parish councils and others can help us get an evidence base, we can try and issue an Article 4 direction to remove that permitted development right, which is a power we have. We're liable then to pay compensation for the people who can't do what they would have been able to do under permitted development. But they're probably the three strands. So lobbying the government through consultations, writing to the planning inspectorate and trying to hold them to account on their decisions, and looking at our local powers if we can. But yeah, I'm happy, Rosemary, to maybe jot that down in an email separately. Okay, Henry?
Thank you, David. I wanted to ask if there's any clarification, any progress on the provision of housing that is genuinely affordable for families linked into the local economy, and also considering the diversity of communities. Which you're nodding your head, you know what I mean. So
yeah, I was reaffirming. I'm showing my understanding of your question. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So briefly on affordable housing, across most of the country, the government a few years ago brought in something called a site size threshold. So they said that they got lobbied like mad by small developers who said we're completely being screwed over by the requirement for affordable housing. It's making all of our development unviable. I'm not sure that's true, but the government believed them, and so they said, well, across most of the country, until you build 11 houses, so they put a threshold of 10 in. They said anything up to 10, you can't require any affordable housing. Anything 11 and upwards, you can. And so across most of the country, every planning application came in for 10 houses. In national parks, we said that's bonkers, because our profile of development is so much smaller that I've done some research. I think we've had 3 planning applications for more than 10 dwellings in the national park in 14 years, or however long we've been the planning authority. And the government did hear that and said, well, in national parks, you can set a lower threshold. So from 1 to 5, you can't require anything. From 6 to 10, you can require a contribution. And then from 11 upwards, you can require something on site. So there's been a little bit of a nod towards national parks. What we have also done, therefore, is through our local plan, obviously, we do allocate a small number of sites that are bigger than 10 so that we get affordable housing on site. So in terms of those sites, the sites at Ashurst, we've got a pre-application in there that would deliver 30 affordable houses for local people. The scheme at Fawley that we'll come on to in a minute would be delivering 60 houses in the national park for people in housing needs. So those 2 sites alone, that would be 90 affordable dwellings. We've delivered 50 affordable dwellings in the national park in 15 years. So those sites alone was almost double that. So it's a long way of saying we've got our allocations that will bring some in. We still have the policy supporting rural exception sites. So near your patch, Henry, the sites at Mill Lane at Brockenhurst and Vinnie's Close. We've got the 20 or 19 or 20 affordable dwellings that have gone in there. So we can sort of nibble away at it, but we're sort of making a small dent in the need. But there has been a nod to the national park specific issues.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And can I quickly slip in a question about sustainability and do you think, have you any idea if we're likely to see increased standards of insulation in particular to new houses? The current government having taken a step backwards when on improvements a couple of years ago.
Yeah, you're right. They did. I think that's a polite way of putting it, that they took a step backwards. So they stopped us from being able to require development to meet Code for Sustainable Homes level X, Y, or Z. That they haven't revoked that withdrawal, if that makes sense. They still say to planning authorities, we're almost about quantity rather than quality, sadly. Again, our local design guide review, one of the bits we've done in undertaking that review is look back and said our older one, a decade old, didn't have enough about sustainability and encouraging it. Our new one that we will be consulting on next year and sitting down with our members early in the new year to discuss, will have much more about sustainable construction and techniques and trying to say how they can be incorporated. But again, we're a little bit hamstrung about how far we can push on that one at the moment, sadly.
Thanks very much, David.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, David. Just very, very briefly to back up what David said about the frustration of permitted development rights and the way that they get used, and also to reinforce a message that all of the officers that I've had experience of in the national park, gosh, that sounds a bad way to say things, are very aware of the issues with close board fencing. I've never seen an application where there hasn't been resistance to trying to put the stuff up, and it is a constant bugbear. And the park officers try very hard to reduce the problem. I'd also say if you see stuff going up that you are not sure about, ask the park about it. Just say, should they have done that? Shouldn't they have done that? Because if you don't tell people that you've got a problem, they won't know. And that's all from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Rosemary, I don't know if you still have your little yellow hand up or if it's a new one. Okay.
No, sorry, I left it up. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to rattle through the Forley update quite briefly, just to give you an update on where we are with that. So thanks, Vicky. So yeah, I'm obviously speaking from a National Park Authority perspective. The vast majority of the Forley development is within the District Council's separate administrative plan area, dealt with via a entirely separate planning application, but they obviously do knit together to some degree. So in terms of the bit I know a bit more about, the National Park Authority's decision. So on the slide in front of you there is just the two planning applications that were submitted. So one with a red line for the districts area for 1,380 homes and other associated works, and then a separate red line for the bit in the national park for 120 houses, 35 hectares of green space provision and a site for a school. And so they went through their separate processes in parallel, and the two planning authorities sat down on consecutive days at the end of July to determine those planning applications for their respective areas. So yeah, thanks. So, and this is something that I have to remind myself of, so I'm not patronising anybody at all when I say this. I think the way the planning applications came in and all of the publicity around them and all the watercolours that have been produced with migrating birds going over the top and the CGI images obviously caught a lot of the public's attention, but isn't exactly what we were being asked to determine. So both planning authorities received planning applications from Forley Waterside for what is called an outline planning permission. So that's effectively saying within this area here, can we do this as a principle with this broad quantum of development and this broad layout? It was not applying for detailed planning permission to put a house on this square metre of land using this brick with this plant planted in its front garden. And I think that distinction, I think that, yeah, the publicity and maybe the media coverage focused on the CGI images and the sort of a tower of this height here and so on, that wasn't what the planning applications were coming in for. They were establishing the principle and some details about the road access, but a lot of the other details about the materials, the exact layout, the management of the open space would follow in what's called a reserved matters application. So, yep, thanks, Vicky. So in terms of highway matters, I've just got 2 or 3 main headlines that I won't go through in detail. Highways matters, Richard, Anne, and I'm sure Fran and others at NFDC will have received lots of comments about concerns about the highway access here. Obviously, we're not the Highway Authority, Hampshire County Council are, and this is a summary of Hampshire County Council's final position on the Forley planning applications in raising no objection, but that was effectively a kind of conditional no objection, and the bullet points there pick out all of the things that the County Council were looking for to be delivered through these reserved matters applications through the legal agreement that accompanied the outline planning permission. So yeah, I won't go through them. There's some localised junction improvements, and we've heard about the views of the Forley Waterside Cycling Group who have raised concerns about those. There's also a shared cycling and walking route between the site heading northwards towards the school. And then Forley were also asked to contribute, as well as sort of dealing with the southern end of the A326, they were asked to contribute to the sort of northern bit from Dibden upwards as well. So yeah, thanks. Access and rights of way, obviously of interest to this forum. Probably quite an important point to emphasise here is that sort of, I think in your terminology, extinguishments or diversions take place through a separate legal process that is outside of the planning application process. So they are important issues and they will be dealt with through their proper legal route. What this outline planning permission wasn't doing was saying this footpath here is going to go from A to B instead of A to C and so on. In terms of the, and I've got a slide coming up of these in a minute, in terms of the new green space provision, there would be permissive paths among these green space areas. And one thing we would be saying is that because the green spaces have to perform their function for providing local recreational experiences for the lifetime of the development, there will be a need for those footpaths to be maintained and available for the lifetime of the development. So, and I have a slide coming up in a minute showing that in a bit of more detail. Thanks, Vicky. Yep. So moving on, the green space provision. So obviously there's the brownfield sites and the built development, but actually a much larger area around it would be made available for what a planner would call suitable alternative natural green space. And I think I've talked to this forum about them in the past about these. So at Forley there would be 3 green space areas, and that's because the development itself is quite sort of rectangular in shape, and the logic being if you had all your green space at the northern end, the people at the southern end would actually be quite detached from it. So there are green space areas sort of to the south, to the north and to the east of the development, so they're all within a 5 to 10 minute walk. And one thing we've been clear is that you can't have a scenario where all the development gets built and then a decade later the green space goes in. You can't have that lag between them. You need the phasing of the development and the green space to take place sort of together, so that people living in phase 1 of a development would have some green space on their doorstep that they could use, and that's set out in the planning permission. And the actual detailed design of those SANG areas, those green space areas, will come through the reserved matters application. So effectively we've gone, there's an outline consent, here's a legal agreement, here's your conditions. To discharge your conditions, including those related to SANGs, you need to supply much more information, and then that will be assessed. So it's quite complex, actually clarifying what we've been asked to determine so far into this 15-year project. Thanks, Vicky. And that one, the details on this probably aren't too key, but what this is trying to show you is the power station site itself, and the National Grid substation to the north, which is the kind of big red sort of white rectangular building. So the slightly lighter wishy-washy green are the new green space areas. So there's the one to the north, which I think has an A on it. So that's to the north. Then there's the area to the west of it to serve the sort of core of the development. And then there's a linear bit to the south near the new lagoon to provide green space and recreational opportunities. I think it's quite important to also emphasise on this diagram that the lagoon area to the south on the Tom Tiddler's ground would be managed primarily for nature conservation purposes, and we've been quite clear that we shouldn't be having green space provision and nature conservation provision on the same site because of the potential conflict. So we said to the developer, you can't claim Tom Tiddler's for your green space, you can only claim a sort of a linear strip outside the habitat down there. So yep, thank you. Be pleased to know I'm getting towards the end now. So yeah, impacts on those protected habitats has been a big issue with this. It was examined through the local plan examination. The application had to go through something called an appropriate assessment under the habitat regulations, which is, as the name suggests, an assessment that is appropriate to considering the impacts of the proposed development on the protected habitats. And this has been a big issue for this site, and a huge amount of work has gone into this in terms of a package of 30 plus hectares of green space, new ranger provision, a sort of a nature park proposal, a wetland area to offset nitrate impacts. There's a lot in the wider sort of Cadland estate area surrounding the site. I think the Access Forum in the past have raised concerns about the loss of the habitat within the national park, and the planning application does require that 8 hectare habitat to be compensated and re-provided in full. So I think there's 8.5 or 9 hectares being re-provided to offset that impact. And Natural England did support the planning application. And in terms of those coastal recreation impacts, as well as the on-site provision, there's also a financial contribution towards the bird aware mitigation strategy, which you may have heard of, which is, in short, a mitigation strategy from covering the whole Solent from Highcliffe to Chichester Harbour, with 14 planning authorities paying into it, and that employs a kind of a team of rangers and other measures across the whole of the Solent coast. So this development would be contributing to that, as well as its on-site provision. Thank you. Right, cycling and walking provision, again of interest to this forum. So I've touched on it a bit before about the footpath and cycle link northwards from the development to serve the local school facilities, particularly the secondary school at Blackfield and the Langley area. the legal requirement would require that to be in place prior to the occupation of the development. So a bit like the SANG issue, there's a concern that you don't want the development happening and the infrastructure lagging behind it. So the legal agreement ensures that doesn't happen. Final couple of bits on this one. The B3053, the main little road coming down towards Calshot, that the applicant has talked about trying to reduce the speed of that and enabling more sort of connectivity across it, which Hampshire County Council are quite happy with in principle. I think the theory is in future development coming south or traffic coming southward, use the access road around the fringes of the development and then go down to Calshot, and it would actually enable the downgrading of the road that goes through Calshot village at the moment. So these are things that would be, they've been conditioned by the planning consent, and they would be then worked up in more detail with the Highway Authority. I think I'm coming towards the end now. So yeah, so in terms of what we, the National Park Authority, determined in the summer, I won't read all of it out, but it's basically saying, as you can see in front of you, granting planning permission for that outline consent, and then importantly, subject to the legal agreement, subject to the conditions that we've placed on it, and subject to number 3, whether the Secretary of State wishes to call in the application, which is planning jargon for the Secretary of State, who I think is still Robert Jenrick, has the ability to, across the country, say, I'd like to determine that planning application. It raises some wider than local issues that are really important for me to determine. The Secretary of State, after we made our resolution to grant, wrote to the National Park Authority saying, I don't want to call that in, I'm happy for you to determine it. It's a site that's in your adopted local plans. I don't feel the need for the government to intervene. So that was the decision we made in the summer. That Section 106 agreement, legal agreement, is just in the process of being finalised between the MPA, NFDC, HCC and the developer. And then a lot of the details of the application will follow through reserve matters applications and detailed proposals that put flesh on the bones of the outline consent. So I'll stop now. We do have a link on our website, which has got lots and lots of stuff about it. And the final one for me is just picking up on what that legal agreement would pick up on and secure from this development that may be of interest to the access form. So it's the junction improvements, it's the cycle route northwards, it's picking up on the downgrading of the 3053, and it's securing the provision of the green spaces and public access to them in perpetuity. And I'm done.
Right, thank you. There are a couple of signs up, but we're running out of time.
I sort of heard that, Ruth. Paul, do you want to go first?
Yes, it's just in regards to the landscaping of these sands. Do you know what the details of the landscaping part of these sands are? Because, I mean, for me, I would want to see ensure that there are native species of trees, wildflower meadows to support our bees and our butterflies and so on. And I'm sure that the water part of it will be probably taken care of, but it's the actual sands parts. I'm just a little concerned that, you know, and I've seen it before where landscaping companies come in, actually we've got no idea, and they just stick what's in there to make it look pretty. And actually that has no benefit to the wildlife or connection to what's in the New Forest.
Yeah, so I'll be brief. The quick answer is the details of the SANGs will be following at a later, sort of a reserve matter stage, but we would completely echo your points. Our own local plan effectively doesn't support SANG provision in the national park to meet the needs of development outside unless there are exceptional circumstances. I think Fawley, an island site, major development is an exceptional circumstance. But yeah, exactly right. What we don't want is a suburban park with metal dog poo bins every 5 metres and tarmac paths. It has to be an opportunity, especially as part of it's going on an old quarry, to actually restore landscape character. So yeah, we're trying to use it as an opportunity to actually improve that area. Peter? Sorry, thanks, Paul. Peter?
Sorry, just switch my voice on. I've seen this Waterside Cycling Action Group critique of the programme, and apparently Hampshire County Council haven't responded to it at all yet, and yet they've published plans to start work.
Yeah, so I know they've written to Hampshire County Council. They've also written to the National Park Authority chairman about their views on it. My understanding was I thought a meeting was going to be set up between the parties to explore their comments, because I think they raised some quite valid points, and there was a view that it would be beneficial for a discussion about the points they make. The reason I'm hesitating is I'm not sure whether planning permission is required for some of the off-site junction improvements. Typically, if they're within junction, the county council can implement them without our planning permission being required. But I can check on that, Peter, about whether people are proactively responding to the comments of that group. Yeah, as I say, my recollection was that a meeting was going to be set up to sort of discuss them, because I think people thought they'd raised some quite good points.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. But they haven't had this meeting yet, and yet the surveyors are out there and the cones are out there and what have you. There's people from the County Council Highways Department working on the road at the moment, on the A326. This is.
Yeah, I'll double check what's happening and drop me an email directly on that.
Thanks very much.
Right, Ruth?
No, I didn't put my hand up. I don't know why it came up. But have you finished now? Have we finished?
Yeah, you'd be pleased to know I've finished now. Yeah.
I think we've overrun by some considerable amount of time, but obviously it's something we're probably going to have to come back to, aren't we?
I'm sorry, Ruth, you won't invite me back another time.
Right.
Vicky, I'm not sure I can hear Ruth saying anything.
You can. I've suddenly got that coming up, which has nothing to do with you at all. So I'll try to rejoin us, go off and join again and see what happens.
Anne, do you want to take over for a second?
Yeah, I'm more than happy, everybody. As first time for a long time as vice chair, I've had much to do other than chat with Ruth. Yeah, so I think we move now on to the Forestry Commission report. Forestry England, and about what's happening out on the forest, particularly with COVID, the situation that we've had this summer. And I'm sure we will get a very interesting update. So I'm going to hand over to Sam.
Morning all, thanks, Anne. Yeah, no, I've put together sort of a loose update, really. I do need to call off at 11:30. So if I maybe go through a few sort of the headlines that we're picking up, working through, we'll see how we're doing on time. I know there may be a few technical or site-specific questions. Let's if we can maybe leave those to the end, and then we'll see how we get on. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, whatever suits, Sam, as I say. But you better start talking now, I think, then.
Okay. Yeah, so I know most of the group, just going through some of the names, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Jones. So I'm Head of Recreation and Public Affairs for Forestry England in South England. I joined Forestry England just over a year ago now. Those who do know me from different hats, but my main involvement down in Hampshire was originally with the Access team, so working alongside Alison Perry, and then more recently I was running the Rural Affairs programme as well. So I've had crossover in a number of remits. Yeah, so I'm not the only change at Forestry England in the last year. My whole team, so the entire recreation team, has had a number of sort of moves and turnarounds and some other new people. I won't give you the full list, certainly not with the time we've got, but I think some key names specific to the New Forest is worth running through. Richard Burke, most of you will be aware of. So he was the District West Manager. So he was responsible for the strategic and operational work across the New Forest, Moors Valley and over into Dorset. Richard has moved full-time to be the RMS Programme Manager, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And he's been replaced by a chap called Nick Wardlaw, who some of you may know from the HLS programme. He was very closely involved and leading on a lot of the wetland habitat work that many of you will be aware of in the forest. So Nick's got a lot of experience and he's come into that role. Another change, I'm sure you all know Zoe Cox, who was the community manager in the New Forest. She is now doing the same job as Nick Wardlaw, but over in the east. So she's away from the forest now. You may cross over with her with maybe some of the development mitigation work, particularly when we're looking beyond the New Forest boundaries and looking at how the spaces join up. But Zoe's been replaced by a lady called Sammy Fraser with an S, not a Z. Sammy's great, a lot of energy. She's come over from, she's working with the National Trust in Exmoor. I think most recently she was working on a project involving reintroduction of beavers and things like that, and looking at the landscape impacts and changes there. But so Sammy's come in and is leading the recreation ranger team on the Crown Lands as well. There has been a lot of change, but we've also been able to retain a lot of experience, and we're very fortunate to still have Gary North, who you all know well. So Gary leads the operations team in the New Forest as well, amongst many other hats that Gary wears for us now. So yeah, a bit of an update on the change there. I think, you know, we could probably talk all day about COVID. I think if I just pick that up as a general introduction really, and where we are on that. It's no secret. I mean, we mentioned one of the issues earlier today with human waste that Rosemary flagged. It's been a hugely challenging year, not just in the New Forest, across the whole estate, indeed across the whole country, in terms of managing the changes on public access, but also the regulations, the expectations on us in terms of supporting shutdown and the easements of shutdown and all the different tiers and the stages and the government updates that came through. You know, that was very challenging in itself, but also the changes in numbers that we've seen. It's not just more people coming and doing the same thing. It's been a huge increase in numbers that we've all seen, but also different people coming to the forest and different people bringing different experiences, different expectations, different knowledge of how to behave, you know, what's safe, what's appropriate for the environment, for others, for stock, and everything in and around that on the New Forest. So yeah, it's been a very challenging year. There's been a lot of discussion around it. Obviously, we've had lots of inquiries. We've been working very closely with a lot of the partners. I think not so much myth busting, but I think there's, as with all these sort of things, you do get the generalization. You do get certain views and opinions sort of being thrown around. And one of the things that's been said is what we saw in the summer was an insight to the future. You know, all these numbers, all these things. I think in some sense, that's a useful statement because it talks around pressures and visitor pressures. I think it's too simplistic to say that. It was an unprecedented year. There was a lot of people coming to our green spaces because they couldn't go anywhere else. And like I said earlier, they're behaving in certain ways, not just in terms of numbers and pressures, but, you know, the activities and what they're doing when they're here. So I think if you do hear about this sort of insight to the future, I'm happy for you to say, well, from my view, I think that's too simplistic. I think it's a useful tool, but I think it's a far more complicated discussion. I think what it has done, and I think the be careful how I say this, because nothing's been worth the year we've gone through, but we do need to learn from these things and respond appropriately. And what I think has been useful this year is it's stress tested the recreation infrastructure and our services and our legislation and our bylaws in a way that we've not seen before. And that's critically important. It's critically important that we measure that and we understand it and we respond from that. Before I get into the hows and whats we're doing, I would say, again, another positive that's come out of this year is, and I know some of the, I learned some of these lessons well from this group. The forest is unique in many ways, not in all ways. I grew up near Exmoor. There's a lot of similarities on Exmoor there, but it is unique in many ways. But one of the things that makes it unique and also gives it the potential it does is the complex interaction of the partners and stakeholder groups that we have in the forest. And we've all spent years working on partnership programs like the RMS and other aspects coming through. There's always been differing views. I think it's always important we have differing views, and we work collectively, sometimes agree to disagree, but let's all act in the interest of the forest. I think one thing I have experienced, and Gary and I have spoken about it, Bruce and I have spoken about it, is the pressure brought to the forest this summer has arguably brought a closer alignment of the partners and stakeholders on some common goals. I think that's brought some really important successes this year again. I saw some real value in the alignment of the communications and the campaigns and the messaging on the big issues. And we saw some real change as a result of that. And, I flagged one, you all have read about the Wareham fire, where we lost a few hundred hectares of extremely valuable habitat down there on the Dorset Heath. And it was at that very same time that Gary's team, Sammy's team, the whole REC team, and all of the keepers and many other Forestry England members of staff from other functions were out on the ground, working with the MPA, working with the CDA, working with the Agisters, and a wide range of other people, trying to engage and deal with issues about wildfires, barbecues, and we had success there. We saw an absolute U-turn in terms of barbecue use out on the open forest, and that was a result of the partners and stakeholders coming together, agreeing to disagree on certain technicalities, but dealing with the big issue at hand. And that's something we have to take forward, and it's certainly something that we're continuing to champion from our side. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview. I'll come back on questions. Paul, I can see got your hand up there as well. So I think, without getting too woolly, I think I'll start anchoring it down into a bit more of what we're doing specifically. So, and if I may, I'll talk about the RMS and the programme quickly, and I'll talk about how we're using business plans as our platform to inform what needs to be done. So on the RMS, I know it well. I was involved in some of the early sessions about 10 years ago. I can see some similar faces around here. Anne and Ruth will know them well. Brockenhurst, Wednesday, 6:30, Brockenhurst Village Hall, but really good conversations and debate. I've gone away, I've done some other things, I've come back. This was the opportunity for me to come back. I'm very grateful to have it, but the RMS has moved on. We've got these sort of key strategic objectives. We've got a list of key actions, which is great. And again, it shows that alignment of partners and stakeholders that we need to achieve to move forward. But I'm still asking the question, well, where are we going and how are we setting this out? What's the communication? What's the progress on what? And how do we all become involved and understand that? And I was listening with interest and making notes from Richard about the advisory group, because I now sit on the steering group as well, and it was discussed a few weeks ago around the crossover. and making sure the two groups are working effectively and are well integrated. So it was really good to hear about that discussed today. And I'll certainly champion that from my side as well. But if we're going to progress, we need to start getting on with things, really, in my view, and that needs some resource. So I mentioned earlier, Richard Burke has gone from a district role to full-time driving the RMS from Forestry England's side. There's a lot of things, I've spent a lot of time talking to Richard since he's come into that role and trying to understand, what are we doing about enforcement? What are we doing about, what's the LDO mean? And what's the timeline? What's the progress? What's happening with TROs? What's happening with staff? What's happening with bylaws? And, and everything else that's on the cards. What are we doing with car parks? And you hear rumours of spatial plans. It's like, great, but let's start tying this down. We need something a bit more tangible where we can understand where the priorities are and what the key stages, what the key actions are to go from where we are to getting it done, and start mapping that out. And that, for me, is a program. And we have a program manager in Richard. So, again, to make sure we've got a unified, well-informed position at Forestry England, we've set up our own, it's a task group. So we're there to get some results and actions, but we've got senior managers across all of the functions in Forestry England. So Nick Wardlaw will represent recreation. We've got people from planning and ecology. We've got the operational side, so the forestry side, working together to inform all this, prioritising all these key actions that we've all seen and read. Well, let's start talking about them in terms of importance and feasibility, and mapping those out again into that sequence of activities that you need to go through. If we're going to have enforcement, what do we need to have in place? If we're going to be moving car parks, what does that mean about planning, and how do we work? And just set them out in sequence. So we have a path, we have a roadmap on how we're going to get these things done. That's incredibly important to set the path. It helps us demonstrate or report upon or check in on successes and progress. And it's a really important communications tool. So from FE's point of view, if anyone's talking about the RMS, where are we on this? What does the LDO mean? What's next? We have it, and we can all work from that in a consistent manner. So we're pulling that together at the moment. The second aspect, and we mentioned toilets, we've mentioned car parks. I talked earlier about business plans, and that we're stepping up our use of business planning really to set out our understanding of the pressures on the forest, Forestry England's responsibilities and roles in there, and what we need to do to respond. And we're looking really under three categories there. And one is the place itself. So that is the recreation infrastructure. So if there are places people are going or should be going or shouldn't be going, how do we get the infrastructure right? So if we're talking about somewhere like Blackwater and the Tall Trees Walk, okay, it's an important destination site. It's more robust. I'm not saying it's robust ecologically, but it's more robust than some other areas. Okay, so what do we need to make that site work well? What does it mean around trails, education, information, toilets, and all of that side of it? So it's the infrastructure side, the place itself. We're also looking at our people. So I'm, extremely high pressured year. A lot of our rec rangers, if you do ever see them, pat them on the back. They were doing 7-day weeks, 10, 12-hour days all summer. And these are people that live in the forest. We all care about the forest. They care about it as much as any of us. And they were out there late at night, early in the morning, just trying to deal with the people, inform and educate, and make sure people are behaving responsibly. So the team's been under pressure. More people isn't the solution to everything, but you can't undervalue the importance of having capacity on the ground to engage, have those face-to-face conversations, and indeed, look after the place as well. So we're looking at the pressures on the team. At the moment, I've got 3 rec rangers in the whole of the Crown Lands. you know, we need to look at that. We need to think seriously about that and how we find the funding there. So we've got the people element, we've got the place element. The third thing is I mentioned the campaigns earlier, the cross-partnership campaigns. You know, we've got to tell the story well. People need to understand what's going on in the forest, what's going well, where the pressures are, where the problems are. And Forestry England have to play a key role in that. So I've been doing a lot of work with our communications and marketing team, again, to learn on the successes of the summer when we were really under stress, under pressure, what we've learned there and how we continue to do that going forward. And that's around the key messaging at the right times in the right places, using the right platforms. So I hope to ensure that Forestry England remain or are very visible in what we're trying to do to protect the forest in that aspect. So yeah, there we are. We're sending out the RMS, making sure it's visible. There's a program, we're demonstrating progress and we're championing and driving that. Our business plans around understanding the position that we're under and setting out what we need to do to respond. The big gap remains in resource. You know, all these things cost money. And we need to find ways to achieve that. Now, I've been writing a few sort of business cases along with some of the other team for internal investment within Forestry England, but it is important to recognise South Forest District certainly it isn't commercially viable. It costs money. The timber and the recreation business doesn't cover the costs of looking after Southern England's estate, but there is a mechanism across Forestry England as a whole where we can seek internal funding if we make strong business cases for investment in infrastructure and teams. So we're looking at that, but importantly, we've also got to look externally. Some of that is grants, you know, making sure we're aligned to government funding streams and other funding grants, but obviously they tend to be very specific, very time-phased, sometimes quite limited in what they can affect. But there's other aspects as well, and I've been talking to David at the park around development mitigation. We've been talking to NFDC and Test Valley around, well, if we need to mitigate the impacts of recreation on the forest, and Forestry England, it's right and proper that we're involved in that. That may be on the Crown lands, but also off the Crown lands as well, and looking at how the whole green space interconnects and what the relationship is there. So I did say I'd try and be as quick as I can. I hope that's useful. I did drop a note. The chap's just come back to me. I have got about 10-15 minutes for questions. Maybe you won't need it all. But Ruth, if it's okay with you, should we go into questions?
I think so. We've got Gary. Gary will be able to do it. Okay, questions then.
I think Paul had his hand up first.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. You touched on quite a few of the subjects that are concerns to me, and obviously one of them, and this year it's given you an insight into possibly what could happen in the future as there more of an influx and migration of people into the area and the amount of visitors into the area. And one of my biggest concern is the watering down of the understanding of what the New Forest and its value is all about, and it's about its history, it's about its traditions, its way of life, its value. And you already said, you know, we care about the New Forest, and a lot of other people care about the New Forest. Why is that? Because they've learned to understand what the New Forest is all about, or are working within that land-based industry. So education is a key thing, and it's how we get that out to the masses in there. Because at the moment, it's like firefighting specific areas. It's kind of we have to take I feel a long-term view and put those plans in place while we're trying to firefight it. Because this is only going to get bigger issues, and it's people who have no understanding about the New Forest and the way we should look after it. So for me, the key is really education, which I'm trying to do with my students in regards to that. It's only a very small little thing, but it's something to bring on the next generation and the generation after that. It's a bit difficult to do with the people now, but it's the next ones that are coming up behind us. They're going to take over from where we leave off. So, you know, that's where my concern is watering down of its history, traditions, its way of life.
I agree with you, Paul, entirely, and you know that comes down to having the people in my team to be able to engage and educate, help people understand. It's also around this sort of cross-partnership coordination on messages. Sorry, Paul, am I the only one who's lost Paul?
No, I'm here.
Sorry, Paul, I lost you then.
No, his sound is gone on my. Oh, he's back.
Yeah,
sorry, Paul, we lost you.
I'm here. Am I here?
Yes. So yeah, I was just agreeing, Paul, that you know, the education element is critical. People need to understand the place and what their role is in it when they're there, whether they're a visitor, a commoner, a Forestry England ranger. We all need to understand what we're there to do about.
Because with the more buildings that are coming up, you know, and the influx of and migration of people into the area or living in the area, you know, it's important that's, you know, better understand. Sorry,
No, I agree. Thank you, Paul.
Most of us agree there. And I think a lot of the problems with the pressures on the forest because people have not been told and did not know how to behave. Right,
I think it's worth. I mean, we've saw, you know, with such high numbers, it's quite easy to see the trends over the summer, and there was a very clear, very distinct correlation between the availability of alternative activities, whether they're recreation or even West Quay in Southampton being open. You know, the availability of local activity had a massive impact. So I think, you know, like I said earlier, it's important we don't oversimplify the flush of the rush of people in the summer. You know, it's numbers are increasing, but we saw this massive spike if it was mapped, where it's also almost a vertical increment in the space of a week. So, but it, you know, the education is a key element, and it's one of the 3 principles in our business plans: you know, infrastructure, team, and then telling the story. So, thank you, Paul.
Good.
I had Anne, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. And my quick question is on communication, because sometimes I do notice that the messages sometimes are perhaps a little bit wrong. And you obviously haven't talked to each other. An example I will have on Facebook this week, it was suggested that that families should go out in the forest and actually get the children to look for holes in trees, looking for elves. Oh, a lovely idea, but a practical country person would tell you that those sort of holes contain adders and also hornets' nests. And so did the National Park actually speak to anybody at the FE about that? Because that sometimes we don't quite get the messages right, and that can make it very difficult to undo such a message.
It's a good point, Anne. I think I can't answer that one. It didn't. I'm not too close to that, but I think again, lessons learned over the summer: alignment of partners, the MPA and Forestry England comms team work very closely together. They're probably speaking at least every other day at certain points. So, but yeah, there's always going to be, like all these things, there's always a few exceptions that we could choose, but I think it's important around where the trends are right now. And I think the alignment on messaging on big ticket items and local promotional work is improving.
I think it's very important, because obviously you introduced not long ago the Griffin Trail up at Boulderwood, and people were still coming to see it when it was only a one-off one. They were still coming a year or 2 afterwards. So it's very difficult to undo the messages once they're put out there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Communication
Henry was next, was it? Thank you, Anne. Henry.
We've got 3, but you're going to have to go, so these have to be.
Well, I can stay for a few minutes. I think Henry had his hand up quite early.
Henry's first, then Ros, and then it was back to Paul. Then I think we call a halt and we let Gary have a say.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I just wanted, one of the really positive things that has come out, has occurred this year is the communication via video link, as we are doing now, and it has can be very effective. And I wonder if you see a role for that in education, not about education, people making education available to people thinking of coming to the forest, but also for people locally, so that they feel more confident about supporting people who are coming to the forest and excuse me, are not familiar with the kind of very unique environment we live in.
I think that's it's a good point, Henry. And technology is increasingly opening up opportunities really to do things differently. Not looking at how we recently, I mean, Gary secured some of our New Forest sites for a trial on better mechanisms for people to donate, as technologies improve. But I think, under education, communication, absolutely. Before I came here, I mentioned I was involved in the rural affairs programme at the county, and we did a piece of work there around Hampshire 2050, and I was doing a bit of work there looking at the future for rural communities and the impact and changes of education. And it will only open more doors. It's how we key into it and make sure we're alive to that. And that's, the education's a key element. It's another mechanism to get the stories out, get the key messages out before people are here. Visitors coming here, but equally communities in and around the forest already as well, and how we engage. I mean, I'm talking to 20 or so people. We're all sat in our own homes in various guises, and we're all having a conversation about the forest. It makes life simpler and potentially more sustainable as well. So, it's a good point, Henry. Thank you.
I think education may well come up, Richard, within the RMS. I mean, we've seen it as important for a long while, and indeed the Access Forum did a video. Now, to get the correct message over and to get agreed with all partners, it was incredibly time consuming and expensive to do. You can't just put out anything. You've really got to plan it very, very carefully.
If I may, just an update on education and learning for us. It was before my time, obviously, but we had the SR10 where Forestry Commission as a whole went through some major changes and impacts on our budgets, and we lost areas of our team, and education and learning, and it's what it was then changed. And you can hear it from the horse's mouth really for today. Education and learning is very much on Forestry England's priority list. It's not just about school groups. They're an important component. They're a key component, and other youth groups, absolutely. And that's future generations. That's people learning in advance. But for me, any form of interaction between a person and the forest is a learning opportunity. It might be on the ground. It might be reading a leaflet, it might be online, but every interaction there, every contact point is a learning opportunity, and we're committed to getting that right. So we are looking to push and drive our ability to engage on the ground. We're looking to revisit what opportunities we've got to engage with groups, community groups. But every messaging platform that we have, we're looking to focus and drive and make sure we're clear on that.
Okay, thanks, Sam. We are really running out of time, so we'll let Ros have a say, I think, and then we'll call it a day, and then it'll be over to Gary, I think.
Okay, thanks very much. Excellent presentation. Good to hear some traction. 2 points. One, yes, hopefully this year has been unprecedented, but we already quite clear in the way of bookings in the forest, which are up, that this coming year will also be busier. People aren't feeling secure enough to go abroad, etc., etc. So are there steps to change slightly? I mean, I hear your business plans about needing more bodies on the ground, etc. But are there steps in place, plans in place to actually learn from last year and put it into effect pretty quickly? I'm thinking Easter this year, etc. So that's one thing. And the other one I've totally forgotten. So carry on.
It's quite a broad one. I'd say absolutely yes. I mean, when you look at how FE and all the partners were operating at the end of the summer versus going into it, as the easement and shutdown came in, some key changes came in. So we'll be absolutely continuing the coordination across teams. That's not just the MPA and Forestry England. You probably have seen the fire service out and about. The police were working very closely with us. So just in terms of coordination of boots on the ground, that'll continue. We know the pressure areas, and we'll be incorporating and focusing that into where the people are and when we're working. I've mentioned already I see communications as prevention, not just cure. So, we'll be continuing on the campaign principle around getting the messages out early and in advance. So when people are coming, we've got a more realistic chance that they're better informed than maybe they were 10 months ago or even 12 months ago. So that'll be coming through. In terms of major infrastructure changes, I mean, those things take time and they take resource. We've just heard about the planning, one insight into the planning process. Obviously, that does dictate to some extent what we're able to do with regard to infrastructure as well. So, those major physical changes will take some time to achieve, resource and permissions regulations, but that's coming through. Some other changes we're already affecting as well is our permissions and licensing system. So granted, that is only regulated activity, which is the minority, it's by far the smallest percentage of activity on the forest, but it's another mechanism that we're using to make sure what is being permitted or licensed to take place is considered sustainable. And we're working very closely with Natural England because we need our HRA renewed, our habitat regulation assessment renewed, which in its simplest form is basically our license to give license really for people to participate. And Nick Wardlaw, who I mentioned earlier, is working very closely with Natural England now on that license from them, that HRA. And we've also got Footprint Ecology advising and working alongside us to provide that sort of third-party objectivity in what we're putting forward. So there are a few examples there, Rosemary. We don't have a fully polished, worked up plan, and I don't think if we spend all day trying to come up with a plan and don't do anything, we're going to miss the ship. So it's we've got these mechanisms coming through the RMS and our business plans, which sets out our short, medium, long-term goals. But we're trying to be very fluid as well. We've learned a lot this year, and we need to make sure that's going ahead and well used.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Sam. I think we really do have to let you go now. Your boss will be not very happy, but thank you very much for coming along and talking to us. And we'll hear from Carrie and clear up anything else on Forestry England. And I think the recreation and indeed the education will be within that. We're going to be coming back to that time and time again, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see everyone.
Yeah. Bye. Okay, shall we hear from Gary? And in particular, Gary wrote a report, and he did write some of the things we've already covered, but the Longslade Bridges, which Henry was particularly interested in, so maybe Gary could talk on that. If okay. Gary's still with us.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Gary, yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, it's I don't know what Henry's question is, but I appreciate it's frustrating.
Well, he was frustrated the bridges weren't there.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's It's not just me, Gary.
No.
You
Yeah,
have
so,
a report, Henry, on that. That was sent out with the agenda items.
So, I mean, I think for me, the biggest frustration's been around the kind of like civil engineering aspect of it and the kind of like protocols we have to follow around that. There was a lot of surveys that needed to be done. Bridge designs were quite a critical thing and had to be worked up by a specialist team. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but that's how things are these days. And you know, and the timeline was that I suppose we're kind of like a year delayed now, purely because of this year and COVID. You know, our finances were heavily reduced at the sort of beginning of the sort of pandemic. Obviously, because there was a loss of income for us as well. Staff were furloughed, contractors were furloughed, materials were difficult to get hold of, and that's kind of where we are now. And hopefully, as the sort of from our civil engineers mouth, if you like, is that the timelines are that we're at a point where we can go to the National Park Planning Authority now, with a view of trying to get something in place for Easter next year. And that's where we are.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, we do appreciate that COVID has made a huge amount of difference. And I think for people who wanted information about long-stay bridges, it was a very good description you put in your paper that you came out with the agenda. I don't know whether you wanted to say any more on your other items, current operational car park and cycling walks closure. I think, again, it was very explanatory because you wrote a very long.
So, you know, I suppose the purpose of that is to try and save time now. I suppose I'm happy to answer questions, and the only other thing, Ruth, is that I have now got an update from our HLS team.
Lovely. I think that's what we should hear about then.
Yeah, no, sorry, which I only came through this morning. So if it's okay, I will read through it, digest it, and sort of condense it, and probably send it out or send it to you so it can go out.
Yeah, send it to me and we'll decide whether to send it out. It's a very complex situation. A lot of it relates very much to the nature conservation. It's outside of the Axis remit, but we have been involved. There has been, which I reported last time, this massive report, and I did send it to Gary, and he heard nothing about it through Forestry England. But I mean, some other people in Forestry England obviously did. But there's a lot of discussion going on at a high level, and it may be there's some information there which Gary will be able to tell us. As I said before, the whole question about whether there's any money to do it, because it's going to require a huge number of people. I think Gary would agree with that. He won't be able to do it.
And you know, and I mean, I'm not that closely linked with HLS and HLS project at all, really. But you know, and there's obviously, you know, we're in the kind of like reaching the sort of end of the year's extension to the project, and you know, there's always that. You know, we're trying to like, you know, that there's certainly some projects that I've been involved in over the years that I'm kind of like trying to wrap up and finalise, because else they keep sort of being extended as part of this extension. And obviously the sort of like, I don't think there's been any kind of real. Well, there hasn't been any real decision on about where that project's going after this year's extension at the moment either. So, but the update I've got is, yeah, it's kind of like an operational update for the kind of like the last sort of back end of the summer, if you like, and moving forward over the next few months.
Oh, that's lovely, Gary. If you send it to me and Vicky, we'll decide what to do with it. Okay. Hatchet Pond, where we've only really touched on it. Some of you will have seen, actually, Sam did a good presentation on this on the TV, on the local news. So some of you may have seen that. Anyhow, he's touched on that. So I think of the things you've written about, probably, Gary, we've covered them all. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I can't remember if I put some timelines in, but Hatchet Pond, we're hoping to go again for planning consent in the next couple of weeks. There's a few kind of small surveys, site surveys, things that need to be finalised. You know, and again, the timelines are hoping to try and have that works completed, the sort of car park like relocation stuff, you know, before Easter next year as well.
Well, that's fine. Then for those of you who want more info, they can go back to that because there's 3 sides of A4 written on that by Gary. So it's a very comprehensive overview of what's going on.
It is, and you know, I suppose, but you know, you could condense that down. I suppose going back to kind of Paul's point previously, but I suppose you could condense it all down, and that the ultimate aim is to move to a you know, like to move to a better place where we can educate the people that are using and visiting Hatchet Pond as to, you know, why that area is important.
Yeah.
To help preserve it for the future.
That's right. And some of us did go to original consultation about that and heard about it then. So we will probably come back to that in a report from you, just on your new update on it next time. But that's great. Thank you, Gary. It really was a very comprehensive report this time. Now, I think probably we've had so much about Forestry England, we shouldn't have any more questions. But what I realised, Alison, do you have anything to say? You put in a written report, it was historic routes, which we actually talked about, and the amount of work you've done. I don't know whether there was anything else you wanted to add on yours, if Alison's still there.
There was nothing I wanted to add, but if anybody's got any questions, then I'm happy to take those.
You've been doing a lot of work despite COVID and lack of staff and social distancing.
Yeah.
Right, Henry, anything on then the rights of way?
Yes, Alison, I was, I think you, earlier on, you mentioned the word gates, which got my attention. And recently I've been in discussion with Hampshire County Council and Brockenhurst Station about gates and having trombone latches fitted to them as being a means of making things at least possible for wheelchair users, mobility scooter users, to access those portals independently. And I was wondering whether or not, in your reference to gates, whether that was part of your plan. And I wanted to ask if, as we're on the subject, if we could, if that's something that could be sort of written into considerations about when new gates are being put in, that trombone latches are, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it's a complicated area. Well, no, it's not that complicated. There are just some legal wrangling parts in regards to gates. The reference to gates for the historic routes are basically that the gates are replacing anywhere where there's stiles. So already you've got that access improvement. We don't tend to, and I doubt the National Park Authority would do the same, is where you already have a gate, the authority wouldn't necessarily pay to replace that gate. We would pay to improve the accessibility in a particular area, mainly because the legal responsibilities for those structures rests with the people who own and manage the land. So they have the responsibilities, I suppose, ultimately. So any gates that go in that we're kind of talking about are literally access improvement gates. Again, we're kind of tied into what the landowner wants, or what the landowner will agree to, and it's sometimes you might not necessarily get a completely accessible structure, but it's more accessible than it used to be, and that over time you can increase the accessibility by just going that one step further. I mean, obviously, our ultimate goal as highway authority is to basically have no structures, full stop, because they just are a maintenance responsibility for whoever looks after them. So we always work back from that principle of having nothing, and then you kind of take your step back as to where it fits with the landowner and where it fits with what the use of the path might be at this point in time. So yes, we do always look at those options. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head what the specification of the gates that we've that the park have ordered. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think they're probably
accessible, but the path is not accessible really for mobility buggy users.
Yes, I suppose I would say if you've got a gate that's accessible, there's an outside chance that the path might improve, and for various reasons. But it's not. I think the costing was £100 to fit a trombone latch.
Oh yeah,
Which is has to be affordable for most sort of authorities, if you like. And so I just needed to mention it, and I will probably mention it again and again. And I'd really appreciate having the conversation with you, Alison. Perhaps I can exchange emails with you.
Sure, that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed.
Somebody has put up a message that they are having to leave the meeting, and I think it is almost midday. So thank you to Alison for that, and no doubt we'll come back to some of these things. Our last thing, we wondered if people had questions which they wish us to discuss in future meetings. We've covered a vast range now. I don't know, Peter's got his hand up, but I don't know whether it's relevant to this or no, Peter.
No, it's not relevant to this, but it's relevant to people leaving the meeting. I just wanted to mention that John Thackeray had died, and it was his funeral last Friday. Now, John was very much involved in the setting up of the national park in the first place, and I think he was probably a founder member of this Access Forum.
I'm not sure about that, but he was on the Hampshire Access Forum from the word go. And
Correct.
he did persuade me to apply and push for me to be on the New Forest Access Forum, which was didn't start till after the Hampshire Access Forum, but he always did come along to our meetings when he was in good health. So yes, I think he's done a great deal for access. Thank you, Peter. So nothing else from anyone. No one's got a hand up. So I think that we call a halt to the meeting then, and thank everyone. Vicky's got nothing else to say. Our next meeting may be virtual. Probably will be, won't it?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, okay. Okay. Lovely. Well, thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah, very good meeting, Ruth and Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy Christmas, everybody.